Welcome to one of the most scary and strange cases ever written down in Louisiana's history. Before we start, please leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. We want to know what places around the world and what times of day or night people listen to these true stories. It started with a small newspaper notice in the St. Charles Herald on April 14, 1847. A short announcement between ads for cotton. Machines and medicine bottles said, "Missing Mrs. Evelyn Duval, wife of plantation owner Gerard Duval, last seen on the evening of April 10th. Money reward for information that helps us find her safely." What looked like a normal missing person case at first would turn into one of Louisiana's most disturbing mysteries, one that official records would later try to hide, but whose story still echoes. Through the cypress swamps of St. James Parish, the Duval plantation stood tall and proud along the Mississippi River. It was a two-story white mansion with 12 large columns across the front. On the outside, it showed everything the Old South celebrated: wealth, stability, and strict social rules. According to parish records, Gerard Duval had gotten the plantation in 1839 after his father died. Records from the First Bank of New Orleans show he had made the property much bigger, buying nearby land and increasing his workforce to over 100 enslaved people. By 1845, Evelyn had come from Charleston in 1844. She was the daughter of a wealthy shipping businessman who had arranged the marriage to make business connections stronger. The couple's wedding announcement in the New Orleans Picayune described her as a woman of amazing beauty and fine education, sure to add grace to Louisiana society with her presence. Letters that survived from Evelyn to her cousin in Virginia, discovered in a family collection in 1952, tell a different story. "The air here makes it hard to breathe," she wrote 3 months after arriving. "The house feels like a museum where I'm both something on display and someone visiting." Parish records show that Henry Carter had been bought at the New Orleans slave market in January of 1846. His sale receipt, found later in the Duval estate papers during a university study in 1964, listed him as male, about 26 years old, can read and write, skilled at carpentry, healthy body and good behavior. A rare note at the bottom, probably written by Gerard Duval, said, "To work in house and help organize the library." What came next was a time of seeming calm. The plantation's money records from 1846 show growing profits from sugarcane farming. Gerard Duval's name appears often in parish meeting notes where he argued for stricter controls on the movement of enslaved people between plantations. A diary belonging to Margaret Fontaine, wife of a nearby plantation owner, mentions Evelyn at various social events, describing her as quiet to the point of being invisible, though her eyes seemed to notice everything. The diary entry from Christmas of 1846 notes that Mrs. Duval seemed unusually distracted during the church service and left before the meal was served. The winter of 1846 changed to spring, and with it came the first problems in the plantation's carefully kept order. A record book entry from March 3rd notes, "Punishment needed for Henry, found in mistress's private sitting room without permission." Another entry from March 21st says, "H.C. moved to field work as punishment." But a strange opposite entry, dated March 28th, puts him back to household duties with the note, "At mistress's request, H.C. returned to library work." On April 10th, 1847, several things happened at once. According to the overseer's daily report, Gerard Duval left for New Orleans on business, expected to return in 3 days. The weather journal kept by the plantation manager noted heavy rains starting at sunset and continuing through the night. The last recorded sighting of Evelyn was by the cook, who later told investigators she had asked for tea to be brought to the library at about 8 in the evening. By morning, both Evelyn Duval and Henry Carter were gone. What followed was a search bigger than anything St. James Parish had ever seen. Gerard Duval returned from New Orleans and immediately organized search parties that searched the surrounding swamps and checked every road leaving the plantation. The New Orleans Daily Crescent reported on April 17th that 50 men with dogs searched the wilderness, looking for Mrs. Duval, who was feared to have been kidnapped by a runaway slave. Notices were posted as far north as Natchez and as far east as Mobile. The official story quickly formed around kidnapping. "Respected planter's wife taken by slave," read the headline in the Baton Rouge Gazette on April 21st. The Article quoted Gerard Duval claiming that Henry had shown signs of being unstable and had developed an unhealthy interest in Mrs. Duval because of their shared interest in books. A reward notice published in many Southern newspapers offered $1,000 for the return of Mrs. Evelyn Duval and the capture, dead or alive, of the Negro man Henry, who has taken her against her will. But problems with this story appeared almost right away. A statement given to parish authorities by Rachel, an enslaved woman who served as Evelyn's lady's maid, noted that mistress had been packing a small bag for several days, adding items slowly so as not to draw attention. This statement was removed from official records, but kept in the private notes of Sheriff Thomas Wilkinson, found among his belongings after his death in 1861. More importantly, a list made of Evelyn's belongings revealed the absence of not only clothes and personal items, but also several books from the library, including copies of Voltaire and Rousseau that parish records show had been ordered from New Orleans the previous autumn. Gerard Duval insisted these items had been taken by Henry as more proof of his crime. As the search went into its second week, a riverboat captain reported seeing a white woman and a black man boarding his boat at a small landing 10 miles downriver from the Duval plantation on the morning of April 11th. According to his statement, they had bought passage to New Orleans, where they got off the boat and disappeared into the city. When asked about their behavior, the captain reported that they spoke little but sat close together, and the woman wore a dark veil the whole trip. When asked directly if the woman appeared to be in danger or forced, the captain's response was reportedly, "No more than any woman traveling with a man." The trail went cold in New Orleans. Despite big searches of the city, especially in areas known for hiding runaways and free people of color, no more confirmed sightings happened. A rumor spread that they had gotten on a ship going to Haiti, but shipping records from that time show no passengers matching their descriptions. As weeks turned into months, the public story began to change. The Picayune published an article in June suggesting that sources close to the Duval household say the marriage had been troubled from the start, hinting at cruel treatment that may have caused Evelyn to run away. Gerard Duval responded with threats of taking legal action, and newspapers after that went back to the kidnapping story. By fall, the case had mostly disappeared from public talk. Gerard Duval sold the plantation in December of 1847 and returned to France where his family had roots. Parish records show he said unhappy memories as his reason for leaving. The plantation house itself burned to the ground in 1849, blamed on a lightning strike. Local rumors suggested arson, though no investigation was ever done. The case might have stayed buried and forgotten had it not been for the discovery of a strange document in 1958 during repair work on an old townhouse in the French Quarter. Workers found a sealed tin box hidden inside a wall cavity. Inside was a journal, damaged by water but partly readable, with the writing "property of E.D." The journal was given to Tulane University historians, who dated it to the mid-1800s, based on the paper makeup and ink. Testing. Only pieces of the journal remain readable, but they paint a shocking picture different from the official record. One entry, thought to date from early 1846, reads, "G treats his books with more tenderness than he has ever shown me." The new man H understands their value as well and speaks of authors I had not expected anyone here to know. A later entry continues, "H and I discussed Rousseau today when G was busy with the mill machinery. He has learned through paths I cannot imagine, getting knowledge despite every barrier put up against it. By winter of 1846, the tone changes. The way G looks at H when he thinks I do not notice, with suspicion, with hate, I fear what may come." And later, "G struck me today when I protested H's move to the fields, said I had become too friendly with the slaves. If only he knew the thoughts that now fill my mind." The final readable entry, undated but probably from early April 1847, is the most revealing. We have agreed. When G goes to New Orleans, the riverboat at dawn, H says there are people in the city who can help us reach Philadelphia. I take only what cannot be replaced. My heart races with fear and something else, perhaps the first true hope I have felt since coming to this terrible place. The journal's discovery created new interest in the case among historians who study the Old South society. A 1962 article in the Journal of Southern History suggested the Duval case showed a rarely documented example of voluntary escape across racial boundaries, though this understanding remained controversial. In 1964, research done in Philadelphia City Archives found a marriage certificate dated October 3, 1847, between an Ellen Davis and Harold Carter. The certificate noted both people were free-colored persons, a common label used by light-skinned, black individuals or interracial couples trying to build lives in northern cities. The minister who performed the ceremony kept private records saved by his church that included a mysterious note. The woman speaks with a southern accent despite claiming Charleston birth. Husband protective, watches door throughout ceremony. Fear evident. Tax records show that Harold Carter started a small carpentry business in Philadelphia's 7th Ward, an area known for its free black community. The business operated until 1853 when city directories show the Carters moved, possibly, to Canada following the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act. No more official records of the couple have been found. In 1857, a brief item appeared in the New Orleans papers reporting the death of Gerard Duval in Paris. The notice mentioned that he died without children, his property in France passing to distant relatives. A single line at the end noted that he had never remarried following the tragic loss of his wife. The most disturbing evidence in the case came out in 1966 when an archaeological dig of the former Duval Plantation site uncovered the remains of a root cellar beneath what had been the main house. Among the burned debris were found 3 small items: a woman's pearl hair comb matching the style of the 1840s, a carpenter's measuring tool with the initials HC scratched into the handle, and most tellingly, pieces of a letter addressed to "My dearest E" that appears to have been hidden in the cellar wall. The letter fragments, studied by paper experts at Louisiana State University, contain several disturbing lines. "Cannot delay any longer, he suspects, and said today he would sooner see you dead than..." The letter's date is partly preserved. April 7, 184, just days before the disappearance. What truly happened at the Duval Plantation in April of 1847? The historical record offers interesting but incomplete answers. Parish death records show no entry for Evelyn Duval, nor any report of human remains discovered after the disappearance. If Gerard Duval knew about his wife's fate beyond what he publicly claimed, he carried it with him to his grave in Paris. Local folklore filled the gaps in the official record. Into the early 20th century, residents of St. James Parish told stories of a well-dressed white woman and a black man in fine clothes, who could sometimes be seen at dusk walking along the river path near where the Duval Plantation once stood. The ghosts never spoke, according to these stories, but always walked hand in hand, looking backward over their shoulders as if being chased by something only they could see. In 1968, the last living person who claimed direct knowledge of the case passed away. Martha Johnson, aged 102, had been born into slavery on a neighboring plantation. In an oral history recorded by Tulane University researchers in 1963, she claimed her grandmother had been a kitchen worker at the Duval Plantation. According to Johnson, her grandmother had always said that Miss Evelyn and Henry had been planning for months. They had a system of notes hidden in book bindings. The master found one, and that's when things turned dangerous. When asked what she believed had happened, Johnson's response was recorded as, "My grandmother said there were 2 stories. One people told about them running away together, and the other one, the one the house slaves whispered about, that the master caught them before they could leave, and they're still there under the old house foundation." But nobody could ever prove either tale. The Duval Plantation site stayed empty until 1973 when the land was bought for factory development. Workers clearing the overgrown property reported unusual things happening: tools disappearing, unexplained, cold spots, and a constant smell of smoke in the area where the house had stood, though no fires had burned there in over a century. The development ultimately failed, with the company saying environmental concerns in their public statements, though former employees later spoke of executives refusing to visit the site after experiencing what they described as a deep and unexplainable sense of dread. Today, the former Duval Plantation is part of a wildlife area, reachable only by boat through the swamps that have taken back the once farmed fields. Occasional visitors report hearing whispered conversations carried on the wind, though no other people are present. Park rangers dismiss these stories as the natural sounds of the wetlands combined with the power of suggestion from those familiar with the legend. In 2008, a history professor from LSU trying to locate the exact site of the original house foundation reported finding a rusted metal box partly exposed by seasonal flooding. Inside was a small leather-bound book, its pages mostly made unreadable by water damage. The few understandable pieces include a passage that reads, "If we are not discovered, this journal will remain hidden, and we shall begin new lives under new names in a place where we might exist together. If the worst happens and we are separated by death or capture, perhaps someday someone will find these words and know that what existed between us was not what they said, not a crime or a kidnapping, but the only freedom either of us had ever truly known." The professor suffered a stroke while still in the field and was unable to record the exact location of his find. When a research team returned to the site, the box could not be found again. The professor's field notes were considered unreliable. Due to his medical condition and academic interest in the case once again faded. In the parish courthouse, the official record of the Duval case remains filed under Unresolved Crimes Abduction, a thin folder containing yellowed newspaper clippings and the original missing person report. The alternative story of an unlikely partnership, a desperate escape, or possibly a hidden murder exists only in fragments scattered through university archives, folklore collections, and the whispered stories still occasionally told by the oldest families in St. James Parish. The true fate of Evelyn Duval and Henry Carter remains unknown. Whether they found freedom together in the North, met a violent end at the hands of a jealous husband, or exist now only as troubled spirits along the Mississippi, their story continues to echo through the heavy Louisiana air, a reminder of a time when crossing the boundaries of race meant risking everything, when the lines between captor and captive, victim and criminal, love and ownership blurred in the shadow of the plantation house. For those who have traveled to the overgrown site where the Duval mansion once stood, there remains a strange quality to the silence that hangs over the clearing. It is not the peaceful quiet of abandoned places, but something expectant, as if the cypress trees and tall grass are holding their breath, waiting for a story to finally reach its proper ending. But like so many dark chapters in our history, perhaps some endings are deliberately hidden, some stories intentionally left unfinished, their final pages scattered to prevent us from ever knowing the whole truth. And perhaps in this case, that uncertainty is itself a fitting memorial to a woman who vanished from history's pages as completely as she disappeared from that rain-soaked plantation on an April night in 1847, and to a man who history recorded only as property, yet who may have found a way to write his own ending. After all, in 1979, a graduate student in anthropology conducted interviews with elderly residents of St. James Parish for a paper on oral history traditions. One person interviewed, William Thibodeau, then 87 years old, provided an account passed down through his family. According to Thibodeau, his grandfather had been part of the search party organized after Evelyn's disappearance. Granddaddy said they weren't really looking for Mrs. Duval at all, his recorded interview states. Mr. Duval knew exactly where she was. They were hunting Henry, plain and simple. When pressed for details, Thibodeau shared a disturbing alternative story. The story my granddaddy told, which I ain't supposed to repeat, was that Mrs. Duval had been caught trying to leave. Mr. Duval locked her in the cellar room for 3 days. Henry tried to help her escape again, and that's when things turned bad. The search parties weren't looking for 2 runaways. They were covering up what Mr. Duval had done. This account found partial proof in 1848, letters between the parish sheriff and the governor's office, uncovered during a 1962 state archive reorganization. The letter marked confidential mentions the regrettable Duval situation and suggests that certain influential parties believe the matter is best left closed given Mr. Duval's departure from the state and the impossible complications that would arise from further investigation. A series of surveys conducted in the 1980s using early ground-penetrating radar technology detected odd things beneath the former house site that experts identified as consistent with a root cellar or similar underground structure, but no digging was ever allowed. The land had changed owners many times, and the current owners denied access for archaeological investigation, saying they were concerned about disturbing historical remains. In 1983, repairs to an old church in Philadelphia's Northern Liberties neighborhood revealed a hidden space beneath the pulpit containing various documents related to the Underground Railroad. Among them was a list of individuals who had passed through the church's sanctuary between 1847 and 1851. An entry dated November 1847 mentions ED&HC from Louisiana, provided with papers and funds for passage to Canada, woman ill, recovering from injuries, both traumatized but determined. This document reignited interest in the possibility that Evelyn and Henry had indeed escaped north. However, extensive searches of Canadian census records and community archives in likely destination cities like Toronto and Montreal produced no clear evidence of their settlement there under either their original names or known fake names. The mystery got deeper in 1991 when a descendant of Gerard Duval's French relatives discovered a locked journal among family heirlooms in Paris. The journal, written in French and dating from 1848 to 1857, contains several entries mentioning Evelyn. In one particularly revealing passage from 1851, Gerard writes, "I received word today that they believe she has been seen in Montreal. I will not pursue. Let the dead bury their dead. What was taken from me cannot be restored, and I have sworn to forget that name and face." A later entry dated just weeks before his death in 1857 reads more mysteriously, "I dreamt of Louisiana again, the house in flames, her voice calling from below. I wake each night at 3:00, the hour when we found the cellar door open. Some sins cannot be escaped, even an ocean away. I feel her presence growing stronger as my own strength fails." These entries have been understood in different ways by historians, some seeing evidence that Evelyn had survived and escaped to Canada, others reading a confession of murder between the lines, with Gerard's guilt showing up as nightmares and paranoia in his final years. In 2002, a water survey of the Mississippi River Basin produced unexpected evidence related to the case. Soil samples taken near the former plantation site contained traces of fire-starting chemicals consistent with deliberate burning, contradicting the official record that the house fire in 1849 had been caused by lightning. More disturbing were traces of human remains detected in deeper layers of the soil, though the broken-up nature of the evidence made it impossible to determine age, gender, or number of individuals. When this information became public, descendants of families from the surrounding plantations came forward with stories that had been passed down through generations. 3 separate accounts mentioned that in the weeks following Evelyn's disappearance, enslaved workers from neighboring properties had been forced to dig at night on Duval land. One account specifically mentioned activity around the house foundation and cellar. These workers reportedly never spoke of what they had seen or done there, except in the most vague terms, even decades after freedom came. A journal entry from 1865, written by a Union officer stationed in the parish during Reconstruction, notes, "The locals, both white and colored, share a strange reluctance to discuss the ruins of the Dion plantation. When pressed, an elderly Negro man told me only that some ground won't grow crops proper when it's been fed with the wrong kind of seed. I cannot fathom his meaning, though the land in question has indeed lain fallow since the war began." The meaning of this mysterious statement remains unclear, though the land in question has indeed stayed unused. In 2005, the Louisiana Historical Society paid for a complete review of all available evidence in the case, bringing together historians, archaeologists, and forensic experts. Their 300-page report published in 2007 concluded that while no single definite story can be established, the bulk of evidence suggests that Evelyn Duval and Henry Carter likely died on or near the plantation property in April 1847, possibly at the hands of Gerard Duval or his agents, with their remains hidden to prevent discovery. The report was not without its critics. A minority opinion included in the appendix argued that the documentary evidence from Philadelphia and Montreal, while circumstantial, offered a believable case for their successful escape. This understanding has been embraced by several historical novels and a 2010 documentary film titled The Runaways of St. James Parish, which presents a romanticized version of Evelyn and Henry finding freedom and building new lives in Canada. The most recent development in the case came in 2013 when ground-penetrating radar technology, far more advanced than that used in the 1980s, was finally allowed on the site. The survey revealed a previously undetected structure about 30 yards from the main house foundation, possibly a small outbuilding or storage cellar not recorded in the original Plantation records. Before digging could begin, however, unprecedented flooding along the Mississippi covered the site, and when waters went down months later, the land features had been so changed that the unusual thing could no longer be located. To this day, visitors to the wildlife area report unsettling experiences near the former plantation site. Park rangers have documented dozens of accounts describing a sudden drop in temperature, the sound of a woman crying, or glimpses of two figures moving quickly through the underbrush at dusk. Scientific investigators attribute these reports to the power of suggestion combined with the natural sounds and shadows of the swamp environment. Those familiar with the story, however, often interpret these events as evidence that whatever happened on that rainy April night in 1847, something of Evelyn and Henry remains tied to the land, either as victims seeking justice or as spirits unable to complete their escape. The Parish Historical Society maintains a small exhibition on the case, presenting both the kidnapping and escape stories side by side without saying either conclusion is right. The display includes a reproduction of Evelyn's portrait from the Duval family collection in France, showing a young woman with dark hair and a serious expression, her eyes seeming to look beyond the painter toward something in the distance. Beside it hangs a blank frame where Henry's image would be had any survived, a stark reminder of how completely enslaved individuals could be erased from historical record, their stories left to be pieced together from fragments and omissions. In 2018, a historical fiction author researching the case discovered a curious document in the archives of a small museum in Montreal, dated 1862. It appears to be a death certificate for an Ellen Carter née Davis, listing her age as approximately 40 years and her place of birth as Southern United States. The certificate notes she was survived by her husband Harold and 2 children. Attempts to trace these descendants have so far proven unsuccessful, as the family name is common and records from the period incomplete. What makes this document particularly interesting is a note in the margin, apparently added by the attending physician. Patient expressed desire before passing that certain items be preserved for historical record, include journal and pearl comb. Husband adamant these remain private, respected his wishes as promised to deceased. No such items have ever appeared in Canadian archives. Did Evelyn and Henry escape to build new lives together, carrying their secrets to their graves? Did they die at the Duval plantation, victims of the violent social order they had attempted to defy? Or does the truth lie somewhere in between these stories? Perhaps an initial escape followed by capture and return, or one escaping while the other died? The case remains officially unsolved. The St. James Parish Sheriff's Department technically maintains an open file on the disappearance of Evelyn Duval, though no active investigation has been done in over a century. In the Louisiana State Archives, her case number is cross-referenced with that of Henry Carter, one of the few official acknowledgments that their fates, whatever they may have been, were forever linked. Historians of the Old South note that the Duval case, while unusually well documented, likely represents countless similar stories lost to history, of boundaries crossed, attempts at freedom stopped or achieved, and lives erased from official records. In the words of Dr. Elaine Montgomery, author of Silenced Histories, Race and Gender in the Antebellum South, the story of Evelyn and Henry exists in the in-between space between documented history and folklore, between what could be proven and what was known but never written, between the official story that maintained social order and the whispered truths that challenged it. Perhaps the most touching understanding comes from a poem published anonymously in a Montreal literary journal in 1870, titled simply E and H. While no direct connection to Evelyn and Henry can be established, the final stanza reads, 2. Souls who fled across the line where freedom meets with fear, their names erased, their paths concealed, their whispers still we hear. Not ghost, nor flesh, but memory. too stubborn to depart. The truth lies buried not in earth, but in the human heart. On moonless nights, when the Louisiana air hangs heavy with moisture and the cypress trees stand like guards along the swamp's edge, locals say the old plantation ground still holds its secrets close. Some claim to hear whispers exchanged between two voices, one with the refined accent of Charleston society, the other with the measured speech of a man who taught himself to read despite laws forbidding it. Whether these are the restless spirits of star-crossed lovers murdered for defying the boundaries of their time, the psychic echoes of a desperate escape into history's shadows, or simply the wind through the Spanish moss, perhaps matters less than the story itself and what it continues to reveal about a nation still dealing with the long shadows of its past. In 2021, on the 174th anniversary of the disappearance, a small marker was placed near the believed site of the Duval Plantation house. It has no names, dates, or definite claims, only a simple inscription. For those who sought freedom by whatever path was offered, their story continues. The marker has become an unofficial pilgrimage site for historians, romantics, and the merely curious. Visitors often report leaving with more questions than answers, but also with a deeper understanding of how completely the past can vanish when powerful interests wish it erased, and how persistently it can resurface through the unlikeliest channels. A fragment of journal, a carpenter's tool, a pearl comb, a whispered story, a name on a passenger list, a note in a margin. As for the final truth of what happened to Evelyn Duval and Henry Carter on that rainy night in April 1847, perhaps it is fitting that the mystery remains. In its uncertainty lies the perfect reflection of a nation still struggling to balance its founding ideals with its historical realities, still unearthing stories deliberately buried, still listening for voices long silenced but never truly gone. Some say that if you stand at the edge of what was once the Duval property on April 10th, as evening falls and the first drops of spring rain begin to fall, you can hear them still, not calling out in fear or pain, but speaking in hushed, urgent tones of possibility, of escape, of a future reclaimed from those who would deny it. Not ghosts, but something far more powerful, a story that refuses to end where others decided it should. A truth that continues to emerge, fragment by fragment, into the light.